Hi there. Today I want to talk to you about 6 myths of divorce and separation. Myth number 1, my spouse cheated, so that means the court's going to be on my side and I'm going to get everything. Not true. Once upon a time, courts may have considered that bad behavior on the part of one party versus the other might get you more property, for instance, or make you more sympathetic for spousal support. That hasn't been the case for quite some time. There's really no sympathy from the courts if one side has had an affair or the other. It's seen by the court as a symptom that the relationship has broken down and we need to get these people divorced. Canada is a no-fault divorce system. Our divorce legislation is federal, not provincial, so therefore the divorce laws are the same across the country. Property laws are different. Property laws are provincial jurisdiction, but divorce itself is a federal thing and the same across Canada. It's a no-fault system, which means that after you have been separated for a year, and separation doesn't have to be separate households and completely separate lives, because the court realizes that for some people that's just not going to be practical or financially able to do so. If the intimate side of your relationship has been over for a year, then you can ask the court for a divorce. That's not to say you can't start the divorce as soon as you decided that the relationship is over. While that 1 year is ticking down, you can get a separation agreement, and then when the 1 year is up, apply to the courts for a simple divorce paperwork exercise. The second myth that I want to talk to you. Oh, the other thing about common law is not legally married, so the Divorce Act does not apply to if you've been common law, and common law legislation is provincial. Different provinces have different rules for family law related to common law couples, including what happens to with children, what happens with spouses, spousal support, what happens with property. So if you're common law, that's different than legally married. And legally married means you have a government issued marriage certificate no matter where the marriage took place. The second myth is my spouse won't sign for a divorce, so therefore I can't get divorced. That's not true. Divorces can of course be contested, and there are issues that sometimes will be contested by the other side, but you don't require consent to file for divorce. You don't require consent to eventually apply to the court to have the divorce finalized. The third myth I want to talk to you is we're just common law, so we don't need to worry about dividing assets or spousal support or anything like that. Not true. As I mentioned earlier, it's provincial legislation, and different provinces have different rules for what happens when a common law, well, first of all, what is a common law relationship, and then what happens upon the termination of that relationship. In some provinces, it can be you have to have cohabitated for 3 years, or upon the birth of a child if it's less than 3 years. Property in some provinces used to be that if it was in your name, it was yours. Common law spouses had no claim. If they wanted to claim any of the property, they had to bring what was called an unjust enrichment claim, which is another legal process that they could try to access assets. But basically, your property was your own. That's no longer the case. Most provinces, in fact, I believe all the provinces and territories in Canada have, if you are identified as being in a common law relationship, then you have to divide property. So you keep that in mind, that you can agree, the two of you haven't had any kids, and what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, and go your separate ways, but get it in writing, because up to 2 years later, that former spouse or that former common law can come back at you for more property a couple of years later. So protect yourself, get it in writing, signed by lawyers with independent legal advice, make it solid. The fourth myth is I bought a house before I was married, so I get to keep it. This is sometimes not an unusual thing, where one of the parties has a house in their name, and then they get married, and they assume that when they get divorced, that it's their house. Not quite so fast. First of all, any rise in value or equity in the house from the time the relationship started, you started living together, to the time that you separated, can be considered divisible, half and half. So if you happen to live in an area where property prices rise quite quickly, you could find yourself having to pay out a substantial amount of money to buy your former partner out of their share of the house, or having to put it on the market because you can't afford to buy them out of the house. The other thing is to keep in mind is in Alberta we have what's called the Dower Act, and this was a piece of legislation that came in during the Depression in the 1930s to protect farmsteads from being sold out from under women and children, because women and children were being left homeless. What the Dower Act is for is that nothing can be done with the property unless both spouses, and this is legally married spouses, sign that they were fine with what was happening to the house. Upon separation and into divorce, the Dower Act would apply, and the former spouse has property rights, lifetime property rights, unless they agree to sign them away. This can have big implications for you. So you need to make sure that you have legal advice and you know what's happening, because that house that you think is 100% yours may not be 100% yours, unless you agree. Two grown adults can agree on anything and make a contract, which in this case would be called separation agreement, which is a contract. Let's see. The fifth myth is that if you move out of the house, you'll lose the house in the divorce. That's not true. Your property rights don't end because you're not living in the house. This is quite often, I hear this, especially some of the US channels talking about it. If you have property rights to the house, you still have those property rights. They don't just fade and go just magically, poof, disappear. So if you need to leave the house, either there's been allegations of domestic violence and you can't go back to the house, or the situation is just not going to work and one side needs to leave the house and live somewhere else while this is going on, that's fine. You're not losing your property rights because you're not in the physical property. It would be no different than if you and your spouse own a rental property. You both own it and you both have property rights in it, even though you don't technically live there. The sixth myth, and the last one that I'm going to touch on tonight, is if you get divorced, you get to keep your pension and they get to keep theirs. Not so fast. The pension is matrimonial property. So if you have a pension before you get married, what it was worth at the time you got married is yours. But any increase in value, whether it's through contributions or interest or anything else, a pension is no different than any other investment. And though that pension value for the time of the marriage will be eligible for division 50-50. You can make deals with property. That's one of the advantages of property. As long as you end up kind of with an even at the bottom, you can negotiate. Everything gets put in the pot and jiggle it down. So I have had guys who she kept the equity in the house and he got to keep his full pension, or other way around. So you can negotiate so that you walk away with your full pension, but you have to know that that value for half of the pension for the time of the relationship is on the table and will need to be decided upon. The other thing that most people don't quite twig on is their pension, is their Canada pension. Your Canada pension plan credits are matrimonial property. So if you've had a wife that has stayed at home for the length of the marriage and you've worked, your Canada Pension Plan credits for the length of the marriage are divisible. Some couples choose not to divide them. Other couples, yes, she asks for her half of the credits for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. And it will reduce your Canada pension at the end because, of course, you don't have as many credits to claim your Canada pension. So keep that in mind. What it comes down to is there's lots of stuff out there about divorce. There's lots of stuff out there about common law. You're going to hear different people talking about their experiences, what they think they know, what they learned in another province. I especially see this with my military guys. A guy who got divorced in BC or Ontario is trying to advise a guy who's now trying to get divorced in Alberta, and the laws are just that little bit different. Find out the correct information, use it, and protect your interests. If you can't afford a lawyer, there is a website called doingmyowndivorce.com, and I will link it in the passages below. You can get help there. There's lots of articles there with information. You can arrange to have legal help for a flat fee, so you know exactly how much it's going to cost. And maybe you just need help drafting the statement of claim. Maybe you need help writing an affidavit. This sort of thing, you can get some help there. doingmyowndivorce.com. Have a great night, and talk to you soon.